Morning everyone, so we've got Thursday's learning to go through today. So as before, we're starting with our reading and continuing with chapter 4 of our Matilda book, and again concentrating on those mixed vipers as part of our revision. Okay, so let's have a look at this one, and it's why doesn't Matilda cry or sulk? Now you've got that why starter there, question tag. That implies that it's going to be an inference style question. So that means it's not going to be written down specifically in the text. We're going to have to use our knowledge of the text and find that information. So let's look at why she doesn't cry or sulk in the text. Let's find that information first. And I'm going to answer this question in two parts today, just to add as much detail as possible. So a couple of things to begin with first. Most children in Matilda's place would have burst into floods of tears, but she didn't do this. And extra little bit of information that we can see there is she seemed to know that neither crying nor sulking ever got anyone anywhere. So in answer to the first part of the question, I would say something like Matilda doesn't cry like most children would have done because she knows it would not make any difference with her parents. She knew they wouldn't care and she would have to sort it out herself. Okay, so that would be our first part of the question. And then just to add a little bit more to that, we've got this section here that I've picked out. It says the only sensible thing to do when you are attacked is, as Napoleon once said, to counter-attack. So the implication, or what's implied there and what we can infer there, is that obviously the dad's done something quite mean to Matilda by ripping up her book, and because she's referring to Napoleon, who is famous for winning battles, it's likely that she's going to get her own back. So my answer to that would be, I also think that Matilda will plan to get her own back on her father anyway, because in the text it refers to Napoleon, who is famous for winning battles. This implies that she was planning a counter-attack. Okay, so she's going to be seeking revenge there anyway, so there wasn't any point crying or sulking. Okay, so we've got define comparative calm. So if it's a definition, it's got to be a vocabulary style question. So the first thing to do for this is to find it in the text. And because it's not just one word, it's a phrase, we're going to define the two words and try and work it out in context of the story. So first thing to do is to have a read of the text in more detail to see how the text changes and maybe how the story is moving on within the text. So if you can see later on in the text, it then says, then suddenly he struck again. So in other words, it was back to normal. In other words, the dad was, again, he said he's not selling as many cars maybe at the garage and he's in a bad mood. So he's had a bad day, and struck again implies that he's normally like that. So the comparative calm, we can start to then put that into the context of the story and begin to define it. So if we define those two words separately, we've got the word calm, which means quiet and peaceful, and the word comparative, which means compare something to something else. So in the context of the story, normally the Wormwood household is quite noisy and chaotic, with dad obviously sometimes being in a bad mood. So compared to normal, and just before his dad came up in a bad mood again, the house was quite quiet and peaceful. So that would be how I would solve that one. Remember, it's in the context of the text, which helps us to define these a little bit easier. So have a go at those. Chapter 4 in your Matilda text, and again work out which mixed viper you're answering before you start. So on to our maths, and we're going to continue with our shape and 3D shapes today. We're going to do a little bit of reasoning about 3D shapes, so knowing the properties of 3D shapes from yesterday's lesson is going to come in handy. So as I've just mentioned, these are going to be maybe some useful bits of information for you to look at, so you might want to go back and pause the video on this bit or make a note of this before we continue. It might help you with today's learning. So let's have a go at some of these questions then. All the questions that are going to come up in this video are going to be very similar to the questions that you might find in your packs, so it's going to be hopefully quite a useful video. So in this one, if you pause the video, you can have a go at all of these as they come up. Count and name the 2D shapes in this net. So I can see that we've got 2 squares and 4 rectangles. So give my answer there. And if you want to go a little bit step further, you can sort of begin to think about what this shape will actually be. And it must be a cuboid if it's got those 2 square faces in there. Okay, so on to our next question then. Again, pause the video if you want to have a go before we solve it together. So we've got to match this net now with those 3 3D shapes that we can see on that side. Well, if you look at the top one, we've only got, if you were to sort of fold that out and show its net, you would only have very quite long and narrow rectangles. So it can't be the yellow cuboid there. And if we look at the bottom one, you've got a cuboid there. So a cuboid would be 6 square faces together. So it can't be the cube. It's got to be this cuboid here on this side. It has to be that one. Okay, so now we're going to have a go at deciding what shape this is just from the properties that have been written down. So we've got an octagon base, and we're told that it's got 8 sides which are triangles. So let's begin to piece that together, visualize it. So there's our octagon base, and around that we've got our 8 triangles. Now if we were to fold those triangles sort of upwards, they would eventually meet, and the base then would be the octagon as it says in the description. So what we'd have is an octagonal pyramid. Okay, so let's have a go again. If you want to try this one, you can pause the video and have a go. So task on this one is we need to match the 3D shapes with their properties. Now this isn't all of their properties, this is just some of their properties. So let's start with that 5 rectangular faces. So if something has rectangular faces, and generally more than 2, it's likely to be a prism, and the fact that it's got 5 would suggest that it's a pentagon. So this 5 rectangular faces must go with our pentagonal prism there. And then we've got 6 triangular faces. So 6 triangular faces, if we have a hexagon as the base, then we'd create a hexagonal pyramid, so that must go with that one. And then we've got 2 square faces, which we can say is a cuboid. Okay, so hopefully those questions were quite useful for you in today's maths, and don't forget to keep going with those times table rock stars, looking out for battles which may come up. So on to our writing, and again we're coming on with our spelling, punctuation and grammar. And today we're going to be recapping parentheses. Again, a little bit of revision from year 5. Okay, so let's just recap what parenthesis actually is and remind ourselves of that. It is the addition of extra information or an afterthought in our writing. And it can be a word, a phrase, or a clause marked with brackets, dashes, or commas. So one really important thing to remember, and that we talked about when we were learning this in lessons, is that if you remove the parentheses within a sentence, the sentence should still make sense on its own. So if you take it completely out, the sentence should make sense on its own. So let's just prove that. Got an example here. I moved to Sheffield in 2011 when I was 6 years old. So the parenthesis is in that brackets there, when I was 6 years old. If we take it out, the sentence, it will still make sense. So I moved to Sheffield in 2011. Okay, so let's look at the 3 different types of punctuation that you can use for parenthesis. You've got commas, brackets, and dashes. Commas and dashes can be swapped around quite easily. You can use one or the other. So let's see if we can spot the parenthesis in the following sentences. So if you want to pause the video between each one, you can have a go at this while we before we solve it together. So the Narcissus daffodil is a spring plant with yellow petals. So see if you can find and identify the parenthesis in that sentence. Okay, so yeah, we've got that daffodils there, look, commas around each side of it shows us that if we were to take it out, it would still make sense on its own. Next one, so again, pause if you want to have a go. My brother, the one who lives in Australia, is coming over for Christmas. So nice and easy. What's contained in the bracket, in the dashes there, is our parenthesis. And this one's really easy. Brackets is a real giveaway for these. So it's obviously going to be that for the 5th season running. And just a reminder there, only put brackets, dashes or commas around the parenthesis itself. And again, just check if you aren't sure if you've used it correctly, take it out and see if the sentence makes sense on its own. So nice little activity now you can have a go at doing now is there's a small little extract of a story here, and you can add parentheses in to the story, and if you look at the bits in bold, they're little clues as to what you might include as your parentheses, the extra information that you could add in. So if you want to have a go at that, pause the video now and we'll have a look at some possible answers on the next slide. Okay, so possible answers, yours might be different, but what we could have had is, by day, Beetle Boy is a normal boy called Billy, who attends a normal primary school, but by night he becomes the toughest superhero the world has ever seen, even stronger than Iron Man, and spends his time fighting villains. His shell is so strong, possibly made out of space rock, that he's able to withstand anything hitting him, even a bullet, without even the slightest bruising. If his friends ever realise the amazing powers he has, super strength, flying and walking up walls, being just three of the many, Beetle Boy would be asked to show them off every day at school. He knows that as a superhero, he has sworn to keep his superpowers a secret, which he doesn't always find very easy, and use them only to protect the world from evil. Okay, so they're just possible bits. You can see in the bold there, you've got all your parentheses, a range of different commas, dashes and brackets being used. Okay, so quick quiz now, just to finish off, just to recap parenthesis. So you just need to decide for each of the 5 sentences where the parenthesis might go in there. Remember which punctuation are you going to use, dashes, brackets or commas. Okay, so first one, you've got which is normally delivered at 9:30 is our parenthesis, so we could use brackets around that. Today we went on a trip to York where I'd never been before, so we would put that where I'd never been before maybe in brackets. Some people don't like the rain, especially in England, but I do, so that especially in England is our parenthesis there. You use brackets for that. Many cats, but not all of them, sleep for 15 hours a day. So again, but not all of them is our parenthesis there. And Ricky plays the guitar. I am sure he'll be a rock star one day in our school band. So you can. I am sure he'll be a rock star one day is our added information. You could use dashes in there. Okay, so have a go with that.